working on factoring quadratic expressions. But before we can factor, we first have to remember foiling, because we have to use foiling when we multiply two binomials. It's very important to remember foiling when we do factoring. So hopefully remember that foiling means that we multiply our first numbers, then our outside numbers, our inside numbers, and then our last numbers. So let's first multiply the first numbers. These two numbers come first in the parentheses, so they get multiplied together first. So x times x gives me x squared. Next, I want to do my outside numbers. My outside numbers are the ones on the outside of my parentheses. So I have my x on the outside here and my 2 on the outside here. I want to multiply my outside ones together. So I take x times 2, and I get 2x. Then I want to do my inside numbers, these two. I want to take my negative 3 times my positive x and get a negative 3x. Then I want to do the last two numbers in the parentheses. So that would be a negative 3 and a positive 2 to give me a negative 6. So now that I have that, what I want to do is combine my like terms. When we multiply binomials, most of the time, these are the only numbers that you're going to be able to combine. So I have x squared. My 2x minus 3x is going to give me a negative x, and I still have my minus 6. So what I've done is I've taken these two binomials, I've multiplied them together, and I get this quadratic expression. When you factor, you start out with the quadratic expression, and you want to get the two binomials that you multiply together. So this is foiling. Let's talk about factoring. Factoring starts here. So I'm going to start with x squared minus x minus 6. What I want to do is come up with two binomials that look like this in these parentheses, that when I multiply them back together, I get that. In order to factor, we first have to consider the factors, and the factors of this number, and then the factors of this number. Those are the things that are important. So first, let's consider, what number is right here? Well, it's just a 1. So we want to find the factors of 1. Well, the factors of 1 are just 1 times 1. So my only option for this first one is 1x and 1x. So I know that those are going to be right. Next, I have to consider the factors of 6. So one possibility is that I could do 1 times 6. Or I could do 2 times 3. If I did 3 times 2, that's the same as this. And if I did 6 times 1, yeah, that's the same as that. So I really only have these two to choose from. Let's say I'm just going to choose the first ones, 1 and 6. 1 and 6. Now I want to think to myself, okay, this has a negative sign here. So I need one of these numbers to be negative and the other to be positive. Because when I multiply these together, I need this to be a negative answer. The only way to get a negative is with one positive and one negative. So make that negative and that positive. What I want to do is just try this. I'm going to FOIL it out and see if I get this expression back. So I'm going to do my first, outside, inside, and last. So I'm going to multiply my two first numbers. So x times x gives me x squared. So far, this one and this one look the same. Next, I'm going to do my outside. So x times 6 gives me a negative 6x. Then I'm going to do my inside numbers. The 1 times the x gives me a positive x. Then my 1 times the 6 gives me a negative 6. So far I have my first number correct, and my last number is right. But my number in the middle, is that going to be right? That's what you want to determine. So if I take my negative 6 and add, my negative 6x and add x, I have a negative 5x. Is this the number in the middle that we want it to be? No. Since that's not the number in the middle, we did something wrong. These cannot be our factors. So if the factors can't look like this, the factors could look like that. So first thing you want to check is, can you flip your signs? If I make this one positive and this one negative, is that going to give me the answer? Well, let's try. Let's do our first ones. Let's do our outside. Then let's do our inside. And then do our last. Now let's see if when we combine our terms, we get this number in the middle. So x squared, 6x minus x gives me a positive 5x minus 6. Does this now give me the number I want in the middle? No. That means I've tried all of my options with that one. So it's not going to work. So what that means is that 2 and 3 is definitely going to work. It's going to factor. So I make one of them 2 and the other one 3. And again, we remember this is a negative 6, so one of these numbers has to be positive, the other has to be negative. So let's try a positive 2 and a negative 3. See what happens. When I multiply my first, this gives me x squared. When I multiply my outside, this gives me a negative 3x. When I multiply my inside, I get 2x. And when I multiply my last, I get negative 6. When we combine like terms here, the negative 3x and the positive 2x give me a negative x minus 6. So did I get the number in the middle that I want? Yeah. That means I factored correctly. So these are my 2 factors that when I multiply them together, get me this quadratic formula. So this is what we want for our answer. We've taken this and factored it to here. Now let's go through a few examples. The only way to do factoring is by examples. So let's try some. Let's say we have 4x squared plus 32. What we want to do is we want to factor out anything that's common. So when we start factoring, first thing that we want to do is start by factoring out common terms. And then after we do that, we want to create the 2 binomials. In other words, after step 1, we want to do step 2. We make the 2 binomials looking like that. Okay? So let's start with step 1, factoring out common terms. Is there anything in common with 4x squared and 32? Well, yes. A 4 goes into 4x squared and a 4 also goes into 32. So we're going to first factor out the 4. When I factor a 4 out, 4 times what number gives me x squared? Well, that's just a 1. When I factor out a 4 from 32, I think to myself, okay, what number times 4 is going to give me 32? Well, that's 8. So I know when I pull out a 4, I'm going to be left with an 8. If I were to distribute this back, I would get that. That's how we know we factored it out correctly, is if we distribute it back, we get this. So far I've done step 1. I factored out my common terms. Next, I want to create my 2 binomials. So we want to think to ourselves, the 4 just gets carried along. We don't need to worry about it anymore. After that, we just worry about the 2 numbers in the middle. So we want to think to ourselves, okay, what number is here? Well, that's 1. So I know my factors for 1 are just 1 and 1. So the only thing that this could be is x and x. Then you want to think to yourselves, okay, how about this number? Well, that's an 8. So my factors of 8 are 1 and 8. Then my factors are 2 and 4. My factors are also 4 and 2, but again, that's right there, and then 8 and 1. So these are all my factors. Those are all my possible combinations. Let's try the first one. Let's do a 1 and an 8. Since this is positive, I know that these both have to be positive, because the only way when I multiply to get a positive is if they're both positive or if they're both negative. We'll try both negative next. Let's first try them both being positive. So now if I FOIL this back together, x times x gives me x squared. That's my first. Next I want to do my outside. These 2 here. X times 8x. Then my 1 times x. Then my 1 times 8. So now I have them FOILed back out. So we want to combine our like terms. X squared plus 7x plus 8. What number do I have in the middle here? 0. There's nothing left. So when I have this, is this a 0? Nope. So I didn't do it right. So I could try to make these numbers negative, because I know if I multiply 2 negative numbers, that becomes positive. So when I do that, I get an x squared still. Then my outside, in x times a negative 8, just changes the sign to a negative. When I do my inside numbers, changes the sign to a negative. And when I do my last ones, I still get my 8. But when I take my negative 8 and my negative 1, I now get negative 9x in the middle. Well, is that what I wanted in the middle? No, I'm looking for a 0. So I now know that 1 and 8 aren't going to work. Let's try 2 and 4. Again, since it's positive, they either both have to be positive or both have to be negative. Let's try them both being positive first. So I'm going to FOIL. My first numbers give me an x squared. My outside numbers give me a 4x. My inside numbers give me a 2x. And my last numbers give me an 8. When I add these two together in the middle, I get a 6x in the middle. Do I want the 6 in the middle? Nope. I want it to be 0. So that's not going to work. Now let's try it with them being negative. When I take my first 2 and multiply, I still get that. When I take my outside to multiply, I now get a negative. This now gives me a negative. And I still have a positive. Is my negative 4 and my negative 2, is that going to give me the 0 in the middle? No. I've tried all my options and nothing works. I cannot break it down into my two binomials. That means that this is as factored as it can possibly get. So once you've tried all your possibilities and nothing works, this would be as simplified as you can get.